The helicopter shook like a tin can kicked across gravel. Dust and smoke swirled through the open bay as tracer fire clawed upward from the valley below. Sergeant Daniel Cole gripped the side rail with one hand and the M240 with the other, firing short bursts at muzzle flashes that winked between jagged rocks. His headset crackled with clipped voices, half commands, half prayers, while the bird dipped hard left to avoid a shoulder-fired missile that barely missed the rotor. The pilot shouted something about losing hydraulic pressure. The gun in Cole's hands jammed at the worst possible second. He swore, ripping the cover open, fumbling with the belt. Brass casings rolled around his boots. Then movement caught his eye. Across from him, crouched low with her face hidden under a dust-crusted helmet, Specialist Rivera was already elbow-deep in the jammed minigun on the starboard side. Her hands worked methodically, unhurried in the chaos, like she'd done this 100 times before. She didn't flinch at the sparks snapping off the barrel. She didn't even look at the rounds slashing through the night air. Cole spat grit out of his mouth. "Rivera, hurry the hell up." She didn't answer. She just leaned in deeper, pulling the feed tray, stripping links, resetting the drive spring. A burst of incoming fire punched holes in the fuselage inches from her shoulder. Still she kept working, calm, surgical. Then her sleeve slid back as she reached farther into the mechanism. Under the sweat-soaked camo, black ink gleamed. A trident. An eagle clutching a pistol and anchor. A Navy SEAL tattoo. Cole blinked. For a moment he forgot the firefight. What the hell was a supposed Army specialist doing with that mark carved into her arm? He knew enough about the SEAL teams to recognize it instantly, and enough to know that ink wasn't worn lightly, not by anyone who hadn't bled for it. The helicopter jolted again. The pilot shouted they had 90 seconds until forced landing. Cole shoved the thought aside and yanked his own weapon free, switching to his M4. "You get that thing running, Rivera, or we're toast." She gave a curt nod, never lifting her eyes. Cole opened fire at the ridge line, each squeeze of the trigger timed with his breathing. He counted bodies moving between rocks, shadows darting. Taliban fighters, well-armed and coordinated. This wasn't random harassment, they'd walked straight into an ambush. Tracer rounds zipped past, one grazing Cole's helmet hard enough to ring his ears. He dropped low, teeth clenched, checked his magazine, then popped back up to send another controlled burst. A figure slumped, rifle clattering down the rocks. The kill didn't feel like victory. Just bought them seconds. The bird screamed through the valley floor, rotors chopping heavy air, and then the minigun spat to life with its bone-shaking roar. Rivera had fixed it. Fire poured down like iron rain, tearing into the hillside. Fighters scattered, some diving behind boulders, others cut down mid-stride. The helicopter lurched upward with the sudden release of pressure. Cole let out a sharp laugh that came more from adrenaline than humor. "Nice work, Specialist." Rivera finally looked at him. Her eyes behind the visor were flat, steady, unblinking. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Minutes later the pilot shouted they couldn't stay airborne. Hydraulic systems were bleeding out, and the nearest friendly base was too far. They had to set down, now. The crew braced. Cole held tight, gun against his chest, eyes fixed out the open bay as the ground rushed up. The landing was ugly. The helicopter smashed down in a dry riverbed, skidding across gravel, tail rotor clipping stone. Sparks flew. Metal screamed. Cole's teeth nearly cracked from the impact. But somehow they stayed alive. The moment the rotors slowed, gunfire cracked from the ridge again. Enemy forces had followed their descent. Cole unstrapped, barking orders. Out. Defensive perimeter. Move. Rivera was first on the ground, M4 shouldered, scanning arcs. The rest of the squad spilled out after her, dragging ammo cans, wounded crew, anything salvageable. Cole hit the dirt beside Rivera, returning fire at figures cresting the ridge. His pulse thundered, but his hands were steady. The pilot stumbled out with blood down his temple. Cole grabbed his arm. "You good to run?" The man nodded weakly. "Then run when I say." The squad formed a half-moon defense around the wreck. Bullets pinged off twisted metal. Cole knew staying meant death. They were sitting ducks. He scanned the terrain. Low scrub to the east, shallow gullies leading toward darker hills. Cover, maybe a chance to lose pursuit. He made the call. "We're pulling east, bounding. Rivera, you're with me on point." She didn't argue. She simply shifted position, tight and efficient, moving like muscle memory guided every step. They sprinted between bursts of covering fire, diving into gullies, dragging the wounded with them. The enemy pressed hard, relentless. Rounds chewed dirt inches from their boots. Cole's lungs burned. His throat felt raw from shouting. But the squad kept moving. At one bend in the gully, Rivera halted. She gestured sharply with 2 fingers, "Stop." Then she pointed to a rock outcropping ahead. Cole squinted. Shadows moved. Enemy fighters were circling, trying to cut them off. "Ambush," Rivera said, the first word he'd heard from her all night. Her voice was low, certain. Cole swallowed a curse. They couldn't go back. The ridge behind was crawling. Forward was a trap. Staying meant slow death. He looked at her. "Ideas?" Her eyes narrowed. "Flank left. Hit them before they're ready." It was a gamble. A damn big one. But standing still wasn't an option. Cole made the decision. "Do it. Squad on me." They shifted left, crawling along the gully wall, then surged upward in a rush of boots and gunfire. Surprise cracked the ambushers wide open. Cole's M4 bucked against his shoulder. Rivera moved ahead of him, precise, controlled, dropping targets with frightening accuracy. Within seconds the fighters scattered, broken. But the victory came at a cost. One of their own, Private Jenkins, lay sprawled in the dirt, blood pumping from a chest wound. Cole dove to him, pressing hard, but the kid's eyes were already glazing. His lips moved without sound. Cole whispered, "Easy, Jenkins. You're home. Just hold on." But there was no holding. Within moments the body went limp. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the fading echoes of gunfire. Cole forced himself up, jaw tight. Every decision had a price. This one had cost him a soldier. He turned to Rivera. She was already checking her weapon, reloading, scanning the horizon. Cold, professional. Like death was just another checkpoint. Cole wanted to ask about the tattoo, about why she fought like someone who'd spent a career in shadows. But there was no time. Enemy shouts carried across the wind. Reinforcements were coming. "Move out," he ordered. "We keep pushing east. No one stops unless they're dead." They marched through darkness, wounded groaning, boots crunching stone. Hours blurred. The squad shrank in number, each step heavier than the last. But they survived inch by bloody inch. At dawn, as the first light bled across the desert, they reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Beyond it lay the faint shimmer of Allied outpost antennas. Safety was close, but so was exhaustion. Cole sank to one knee, chest heaving. His squad huddled around him, battered, silent. He studied Rivera. She hadn't slowed once. She hadn't spoken more than a handful of words. But her presence radiated something more than training. Something earned through fire and loss. And that tattoo burned into his mind. Who was she really? Cole didn't know. But he knew one thing. In this war, secrets had teeth. And sooner or later they bit. The desert wind carried the stench of burned fuel and blood. Cole tightened his grip on his rifle and stood. There would be no rest. Not yet. Because the fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. The morning sun peeled over the ridge like an executioner lifting a blade. Cole wiped grit from his eyes and scanned the valley below. The faint shimmer of antenna masts was still there, proof of a forward operating base dug into the desert floor, but it looked far enough away that reaching it in daylight would mean suicide. Open ground, little cover, enemy patrols certain to be hunting. He crouched low, gesturing his squad into the shadow of boulders. They'd lost one man overnight. Jenkins' body had been left behind, covered in stones, an unmarked grave in foreign soil. It gnawed at Cole, but there hadn't been a choice. The living came first. "All right," he whispered, voice rasping from dust. "We've got 2 options. We try for the base now, broad daylight, and hope we outrun whoever's chasing. Or," he dragged his tongue over dry lips, "we hunker down, wait for night, and pray we can stay hidden that long." No one liked either option. Faces were gaunt, eyes hollow. They'd been on the run since the bird went down, ammo running low, canteens nearly dry. Every second of waiting meant more chance of discovery. But sprinting into open desert with wounded was a different kind of suicide. Specialist Rivera adjusted the sling on her rifle, calm as always. "Daylight crossing will get us cut in half. They'll have optics." Corporal Hayes spat into the dust. "And hiding means we're sitting ducks when they sweep the ridge." The squad looked to Cole. His word would decide who lived and who didn't. He thought of Jenkins. He thought of the tattoo on Rivera's arm. He thought of the cold math of war. Then he made the call. "We wait for night. Conserve water, ammo. We dig in." Groans rippled through the squad, but no one challenged him. Orders were orders. They spread out, carving shallow scrapes in the dirt, stacking rocks for makeshift cover. Rivera vanished for 20 minutes and returned with an armful of dry brush and fabric torn from her own pack. She rigged crude camouflage over their position, blending the squad into the ridge's broken stone. The efficiency of her work caught Cole's eye, too sharp, too exact for someone who'd only been army support. Again that question pulsed in his mind, who the hell was she? By mid-morning the heat hit like a hammer. Sweat pooled under body armor. The air shimmered. They passed a single canteen around, each taking careful sips. Private Lewin started muttering about vultures circling overhead. Cole smacked him on the shoulder. Shut it. Save your voice. Ours crawled. Once they heard voices echoing through the valley below, enemy patrols searching. Cole pressed his face into the dirt until they passed. His heart thudded so loud he swore it would give them away. When silence returned, Rivera leaned close and whispered, "They're probing. They know we came down somewhere in this sector." Cole frowned. "You sound like you've done this before." Her eyes flicked to him. "I've done a lot before." Then she looked away, scanning the valley again, shutting the door on further questions. By dusk the sky bled orange. Shadows lengthened. Cole roused the squad. "Pack it. We move fast, silent. No chatter. 2 clicks east, then we cut south toward the base. Stay low." They moved like ghosts, crouched and deliberate, every rock and gully a lifeline. Cole led with Rivera shadowing him, the rest trailing with the wounded. Twice they froze flat as headlights cut across distant ridges. Each time Cole's pulse hammered, but the lights passed. Halfway across the valley, everything unraveled. A flare hissed up from the western ridge, exploding into brutal white light. The desert lit up like noon. Shouts followed, echoing across the flats. Gunfire erupted. Contact left. Hayes yelled. Muzzle flashes streaked the dark. Rounds whipped overhead, slamming into dirt. The squad scattered for cover, returning fire in sharp bursts. Cole dropped prone, sighted and fired. A figure fell. Another ducked. But more shadows poured from the ridge, at least a dozen, maybe more. "Rivera," he shouted. "We need fire superiority." Without hesitation she crawled to higher ground, flipped her weapon to burst, and unleashed precise 3-round cuts. Each shot cracked like punctuation. Enemies dropped one by one, their advance slowed. Cole rallied the others. "Bounding right. Move." They leapt in teams, firing while the other moved, inching toward a low wash that offered cover. Bullets hissed and sparked. Private Lewin screamed as a round tore through his thigh, spinning him down. Cole cursed, doubling back to grab him under the arms. Rivera appeared at his side, covering them with surgical precision. Together they dragged the wounded into the wash. Breath ragged, Cole shouted over the din, "We can't outshoot them. We run or we die." Hayes barked, "We can't run with the wounded." Rivera's voice cut cold and sharp. "Then leave them." The words hit like ice. The squad froze, stunned. Cole's gut clenched. Soldiers didn't abandon their own, not if they could help it. But Rivera's eyes were steady, practical, merciless. She was calculating odds, not sentiment. Cole snapped back, "We don't leave anyone." Decision made. He slung Lewin's over his shoulder, staggering under the weight. "Cover me." The squad moved like a battered machine. Rivera and Hayes laid suppressive fire while Cole hauled Lewin step by punishing step. Sweat blurred his vision, lungs burning, but he pushed. Every round fired back bought them seconds, inches. At last they spilled into a narrow ravine. Darkness swallowed them. The gunfire faded behind, enemies regrouping, cautious about pursuit. Cole collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, Lewin's groaning beside him. He looked at Rivera. "Next time you suggest we leave someone, specialist, you say it again and I'll put you down myself. You get me?" Her face didn't change. But she nodded once, clipped. "Copy." The squad sat in heavy silence. The desert hummed around them, a chorus of insects and faraway gunshots. Lewin's was bleeding bad. Hayes tried to patch the wound, hands slick with red. Cole knelt, pressing gauze. "Stay with me, Private. Just breathe." Rivera crouched nearby, eyes scanning the darkness, rifle always ready. She hadn't flinched when Cole threatened her. She hadn't defended herself. That unsettled him almost more than the firefight. They waited until the night deepened, then moved again, slower now with Lewin's limping between shoulders. Finally, near dawn, they saw it. The razor wire perimeter of the Allied outpost, faint but unmistakable against the desert haze. Relief surged through the squad. Hayes grinned for the first time in days. "We made it." But Cole's instincts nodded. The outpost was too quiet. No movement on the guard towers. No lights inside the wire. He raised a fist. "Hold." They crouched low, squinting at the base. Something was wrong. The smell reached them first, Burnt fuel, scorched plastic. Then the silence became deafening. Cole's gut sank. He knew before they got closer. The outpost wasn't a sanctuary. It was a graveyard. They advanced cautiously, rifles raised. The gates were blown inward. Vehicles smoldered in twisted heaps. Sandbags shredded. The main barracks blackened shells. Flies swarmed. Bodies lay sprawled, some still in fighting positions, others half buried in rubble. The outpost had been overrun, days ago, maybe hours. The squad fell silent, staring. Whatever hope they'd clung to had just been burned away. Hayes whispered, "Jesus Christ." Cole forced his voice steady. "Check for survivors. Move." They split up, picking through the ruins. Cole's boots crunched glass and brass casings. He kicked open a door to the comms shack, nothing but charred radios and silence. Then Rivera's voice called from the motor pool. "Over here." Cole jogged to her. She knelt beside a body slumped against a wall, still alive barely. A comms officer, chest riddled with shrapnel, eyes glazed with fever. Cole crouched. "Easy, soldier. What happened here?" The man coughed, blood flecking his lips. His voice was faint but urgent. "They hit us at night, over 100 fighters, suicide vests, couldn't hold." Cole leaned close. "Who hit you? Taliban?" The man's gaze flicked to Rivera, then back to Cole. He struggled for air. "Not Taliban, different, trained, foreign? Russians maybe. I don't know." His head slumped. Breath rattled. Then nothing. Cole shut the man's eyes, jaw tight. Russians? It didn't make sense, but the battlefield rarely did. Behind him, Rivera's expression hadn't changed. But her knuckles whitened on her rifle. Cole caught it. A flicker. He wanted to press her, demand answers. But Hayes called from the far side of the compound. "Sarge, we found the armory. Intact." The squad rallied. Against all odds, the small bunker had survived. Racks of rifles, crates of ammo, stacks of grenades. The sight lifted spirits instantly. Cole looked at his squad. They were battered, bloodied, but alive. And now armed again. He slung a fresh rifle, loaded mags into his vest, and exhaled slow. Choices lay ahead. Stay here and risk another attack? Push on toward a bigger base days away? He glanced at Rivera. She met his gaze, unreadable. The seal tattoo seemed to burn brighter in his memory. Whoever had hit this base might still be hunting. And he had the sinking feeling Rivera knew more than she let on. War didn't hand out certainties. Only choices. And the next one would carve the fate of every man standing beside him. Cole tightened his grip on his rifle and spoke. "We're not done. Not by a damn sight." The squad looked to him. Waiting. Trusting. Every decision had consequences. And Cole knew the next one could break them, or forge them into something stronger than bullets. The ruins of the outpost still smoked under the gray dawn. Cole stood in the armory doorway, staring at crates of untouched ammunition stacked like a cruel joke. They had more rounds than they could carry, enough to fight a small war, but no reinforcements, no functioning radio, and no certainty who had burned the place down. The squad scavenged in silence. Hayes hauled belts of 7.62, face set with grim determination. Rivera methodically checked each rifle, discarding bent bolts, selecting the sharpest tools like a surgeon. Private Lewins leaned against the wall, pale and sweating, wound wrapped but bleeding through. Every sound, the rattle of metal, the crunch of boots, echoed too loud in the dead compound. Cole broke the silence. "We load what we can carry. Grenades, ammo, rations if you find any. We can't sit here and wait for round 2. Hayes muttered, "Sarge, where the hell do we go? Next base is days away on foot." Cole met his eyes. "Then we buy time. Fortify this place, hold if we have to. Maybe catch a patrol's eye. Maybe not. But running blind with a wounded man is suicide." No one argued. They all knew he was right. They worked through the morning. Sandbags were rest-tacked, a couple of guard towers patched enough for lookout posts. Burned vehicles were dragged into choke points. Every motion carried the weight of exhaustion, but necessity drove them. At midday Rivera appeared beside Cole on the wall. "We can't hold this place forever." He didn't look at her. "I know. You're gambling lives on a maybe. Better than gambling them on nothing." Her gaze stayed fixed on the desert. "You're thinking like Army. This isn't about holding ground anymore. Whoever hit this place isn't playing by the book. They'll be back." Cole finally turned. "You got something to say, specialist, then say it." Rivera's eyes were flat as glass. Those weren't Taliban in the valley. Too coordinated. Too disciplined. They move like special operations. Yeah, Cole said quietly. The wounded comms guy thought Russians. Rivera didn't flinch, but he saw the tick in her jaw. If that's true, then this isn't some backwater ambush. This is bigger. Covert bigger. Cole studied her. The tattoo burned in his memory. The way she fought, the way she spoke, it didn't match her file. You know more than you're saying. She looked at him, finally meeting his stare. For the first time, there was a flicker of hesitation. Then she said, "Need to know, Sergeant. And right now you don't." Cole's fists clenched on the wall. "These are my men dying out here. You don't get to pull the spook card on me." Her voice dropped low. "If I tell you, it puts you in the crosshairs of something you can't fight. Keep your focus on survival. That's all you can do." Before he could snap back, Hayes shouted from the tower. "Movement. East Ridge." Cole and Rivera sprinted up the ladder. Through binoculars he saw dust trails on the horizon. At least 2 trucks, maybe 3, kicking up clouds as they sped toward the outpost. His gut tightened. They found us. Hayes swallowed hard. We stand or we run? Cole's brain raced. Trucks meant heavy weapons, maybe technicals with mounted guns. They couldn't outrun them with Lewins dragging. He made the call. We hold. Dig in. Make them bleed for every inch. The squad scrambled. Rifles braced, belts fed, grenades lined up. Cole moved among them, clapping shoulders, muttering encouragement. He stopped at Lewins, who lay propped behind a wall, pale as paper. "You good to shoot?" Lewins managed a grin. "Better than lying down waiting to die." "Attaboy," Cole said. Engines roared louder. The first truck crested the ridge, a rusted technical with a DSHK heavy machine gun welded on the back. Fighters clung to the sides, rifles raised. "Wait," Cole whispered. His hand lifted, then chopped down. Fire. The outpost erupted. Muzzle flashes ripped the dawn apart. Bullets tore into the technical, shattering glass, punching holes in bodies. The gunner on the DSHK swung wildly, spraying the wall, until Rivera dropped him with a single shot through the throat. The heavy gun clattered silent. The second truck swerved hard, unloading fighters who sprinted for cover. Grenades arced. One exploded against the wall, showering them with shrapnel. Hayes screamed, clutching his leg, blood pouring. Cole dragged him back, teeth gritted, then popped up to return fire. "Keep pressure on them. Don't let them get close." The fight devolved into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off stone, grenades thundered, smoke stung eyes. Cole's world narrowed to the rhythm of trigger pulls, the feel of hot brass, the deafening roar of survival. Rivera moved like a phantom, sliding between positions, her shots precise and final. Cole couldn't deny it anymore. She wasn't just a soldier. She was something else. Something lethal. The enemy pressed harder, trying to breach. One fighter got within 20 feet before Lewins, half delirious, put a round through his chest. The kid laughed weakly, then coughed blood. Cole shouted, "Medic," but there was no medic. Just Hayes, groaning, and Rivera, firing like her veins carried ice. Finally, after what felt like hours, the remaining attackers broke. Trucks burned on the ridge, smoke coiling into the sky. Survivors scattered back across the desert, leaving their dead behind. Silence crashed down. The squad was alive, but barely. Hayes and Lewins both critical. Ammo dwindling again. The outpost looked less like a fort and more like a tomb. Cole sank against a wall, chest heaving, sweat streaking dust. His ears rang. He looked at Rivera, who was reloading with the same calm as always. He forced the question out. "Who the hell are you really?" Rivera met his eyes. For a long moment, nothing. Then she said, "I used to run with Team 7. Coronado, Virginia, classified deployments. I shouldn't even be here." Cole blinked, shock washing through him. "You're a SEAL." She corrected. "Now I'm just a ghost the army buried under a false file." "You weren't supposed to see the tattoo." Cole rubbed his temples. "And now I've got you in my squad playing specialist while we're knee-deep in some covert op gone sideways." Rivera's eyes hardened. "You want the truth? Those weren't Russians." "Not exactly. Contractors. Denied assets. The kind of men who don't officially exist. And if they hit this outpost, it means there's something here they wanted destroyed, or recovered." Cole's stomach turned. "And you knew this before we sat down?" Her silence was answer enough. He wanted to rage, to throw her out, to demand answers until his throat bled. But a groan from Hayes dragged him back. Survival first. Anger later. He knelt by Hayes, pressing gauze, muttering encouragement. Hayes whispered, "Sarge, don't let us die here." Cole looked around. Smoke, blood, silence. And beyond the wire, the endless desert. He stood, rifle slung, eyes on Rivera. "All right, Ghost. You want me to lead these men? I need to know what's coming. No more half-truths." Rivera studied him. Then she said, "What's coming is worse than you think. This war stopped being about Taliban years ago. We're pawns in a bigger game. And now we're on the board." Cole's gut tightened. He hated mystery. He hated games. But one thing he knew for sure, the fight wasn't done. The squad had choices again. Stay and die or move and gamble. Cole made the call. "We strip this place, we move tonight. So, hard and fast. If someone wanted this outpost erased, we don't give them the satisfaction of finishing the job." The men stirred, weary but willing. Orders meant hope. Rivera slung her rifle, unreadable as ever. "Then we'd better move before they bring more than trucks." Cole nodded. His body ached. His soul felt frayed. But the war wasn't giving him time to break. And as the desert sun sank behind blackened walls, Sergeant Daniel Cole realized something he hadn't admitted until now. The enemy wasn't just out there in the hills. The enemy was in shadows, in secrets, in the ink on Rivera's arm. And the war had only begun to show its teeth. The desert night pressed in like a suffocating blanket. The mountains loomed as black silhouettes against a sky peppered with cold stars. The team had pushed hard since dusk, each man carrying his own load of gear and fatigue, and by the time they reached the canyon floor, every boot step sounded like a hammer on bone. Reyes finally called for a halt. His whisper was more command than suggestion. "Set perimeter. 5 minutes." They crouched in the jagged shadow of the rocks. Every sound seemed magnified, the metallic click of magazines checked, the rasp of dry throats swallowing, the distant whine of a night insect. Even the wind that coiled down from the cliffs felt hostile. Dan dropped to one knee, rubbing his sore calf, trying not to let it show on his face. Across from him, McBride leaned back against a boulder, sucking air through gritted teeth. "Tell me again why the hell we couldn't catch a ride?" he muttered. "Because," Vickers replied, "rides attract attention. Attention gets us killed. Simple math." A ripple of muffled laughter rolled through the group, a kind of gallows humor that briefly cut through the exhaustion. Even Dan cracked a grin, though the tension still gnawed inside him. Reyes ignored the chatter, pulling out the small sat phone that only worked in bursts when the satellites passed overhead. He crouched low, shielding the glow with his hand, and muttered coordinates into the mic. Static answered back. He cursed softly, killed the device, and tucked it into his vest. "Signal's crap here. We move another click east, we'll get clearer." They packed up again, but before Reyes gave the order, his eyes flicked to Maya. She was quietly working at the stripped-down minigun again, oiling and adjusting like a surgeon on a body that wasn't dead yet. Dan caught the glance. He had seen that same focused calm earlier when the weapon had jammed mid-fight. Maya never looked panicked, never complained, just worked like it was another day at the office. But he also hadn't missed the way her sleeve rode up as she leaned forward, the unmistakable ink etched on her arm. A trident. The seal insignia. No one else seemed to have noticed. Maybe Reyes had. Maybe he hadn't. But the weight of that detail sat in Dan's mind like a live round chambered but not fired. "Move out," Reyes ordered. The march resumed. Boots crunched on loose gravel, echoing faintly between the canyon walls. The moon slid higher, throwing pale light across the rocks, but still not enough to ease the feeling of eyes watching from above. Hours passed before Reyes finally raised a clenched fist, halting them. Ahead, nestled against the canyon wall, stood the ghost of an old Soviet-built outpost. Crumbled concrete, rusted rebar sticking out like broken teeth. "This'll do," Reyes said. "Temporary hide until dawn." The men filtered inside, weapons ready, scanning corners. The place smelled of dust and decay. Broken crates littered the floor, and one wall was tagged with faded Arabic graffiti. "Clear," Vickers called. "Set security. 2-hour shifts. Hydrate, eat something if you can stomach it," Reyes said. He set his ruck down with a heavy thump. Dan collapsed against a wall, unclipping his helmet, feeling the sweat cooling on his scalp. He tore open an MRE and poked at the cold pasta inside. Tasted like paste, but hunger made it fuel. McBride plopped down beside him. "You ever think about quitting? Just walking the hell away?" Dan smirked. "And go where?" "Anywhere. Stateside. Buy a truck. Work construction. Hell, open a bar. I'd pour drinks, you'd run security. Easy money." Dan chuckled softly. "And what happens when we wake up at night still hearing mortars? When some drunk slams a glass too hard and half the bar ends up on the floor, diving for cover? We're ruined for normal life, brother." McBride stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Yeah, guess you're right. A silence stretched. Across the room, Maya was still cleaning the minigun. She worked in the same quiet rhythm, precise and efficient. Dan leaned closer to McBride. You see her arm earlier? McBride raised an eyebrow. What about it? Tattoo. Trident. McBride frowned. Then his eyes widened. No shit? You sure? As sure as I've ever been about anything, Dan whispered. Before McBride could answer, Reyes's voice cut through the gloom. Heads up. We're not alone. The squad froze. Reyes was at the crumbling doorway peering out into the night through NVGs. Movement, he hissed. 3, maybe 4 figures. No lights. Coming straight toward us. Everyone scrambled into position. Safeties clicked off. The room filled with the taut silence of men ready to kill. Dan's pulse hammered in his ears. He crouched low, rifle aimed at the doorway. Shadows shifted outside. Reyes raised a fist, holding his men steady. The first figure appeared, a young man, clothes torn, face gaunt. His hands were raised, trembling. Behind him, 2 more figures followed. A woman clutching a child, both thin as skeletons. Civilians, Vickers muttered. The man stumbled forward, whispering in broken English. Please. No Taliban. No fight. Food. Water. Reyes hesitated, jaw clenched. Civilians meant risk. Risk of ambush, risk of distraction. But sending them away meant condemning them to the desert. Dan whispered, Sir, they're unarmed. Reyes didn't move. His eyes flicked to Maya. For the first time since Dan had met him, he looked uncertain. Finally, Reyes lowered his rifle. Bring them in. Quick. Quiet. The family staggered inside, collapsing against the far wall. The woman clutched her child tight, eyes darting between the soldiers like a cornered animal. Vickers handed over a canteen. The boy drank greedily, coughing as water spilled down his chin. Reyes knelt in front of the man, speaking low. Taliban nearby? The man nodded frantically. Yes. They hunt. They kill. Reyes swore under his breath. We move at first light, he said to his squad. This hide's burned. Dan watched the civilians huddle in the corner, something sharp twisting in his chest. He thought of home, of a sister he hadn't seen in years. He thought of what desperation looked like when stripped bare. When he looked back, he caught Maya watching him. Just for a moment. Her eyes were unreadable, but there was something there, a flicker of recognition or maybe warning. Hours dragged by. The squad rotated shifts, some dozing in corners, others keeping watch. Dan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, listening to the desert breathe outside, replaying the earlier firefight, the tattoo on Maya's arm, the civilian's hollow eyes. Just before dawn, Reyes tapped his shoulder. You're up. Dan slipped outside, rifle at the ready. The air was cold, the horizon just beginning to gray. He climbed a chunk of broken wall and scanned the canyon through binoculars. At first, nothing. Then movement. A cluster of figures slipping along the ridge half a mile out. Armed. Watching. Dan's stomach tightened. He keyed his radio. Eyes on tangos. North Ridge. 6, maybe 7. Static crackled, then Reyes's voice. Copy. Hold position. Don't engage unless they close. Dan swallowed hard. The figures didn't advance. They just stood there, silent sentinels against the dawn. He lowered the binoculars, unease gnawing at him. They weren't scouts. They weren't patrolling. They were waiting. Waiting for what? Behind him, inside the ruins, the child began to cry. And in that thin, breaking sound, Dan knew the day was about to get a hell of a lot worse. The first pale line of dawn stretched across the canyon, casting long shadows that made the jagged cliffs look like the teeth of a trap. Dan lay prone on the shattered wall, rifle steady, eyes locked on the ridge where he'd spotted the enemy figures. They hadn't moved all night. They stood there still, dark outlines against the sky, patient as vultures. Behind him, the boy's muffled sobs echoed through the hollow ruins. McBride tried to quiet him with a smile and half a ration bar, but hunger and fear made the sound sharp. Too sharp. Dan's finger hovered near his trigger. He didn't like this. They weren't scouts. They weren't searching. They were waiting. Waiting meant reinforcements. Reyes crawled up beside him, binoculars raised. His jaw tightened. You were right. They're Taliban. They know we're here. So why don't they come down? Dan asked. Because they don't need to. Reyes lowered the glasses. His voice was flat. They're calling friends. And when they've got the numbers, they'll close this canyon and bury us. The words hit like cold steel. We've got a family with us, Dan said, voice low. Reyes gave him a sharp look. I know what we've got. That's why we move now before this becomes a tomb. He slid back down into the ruins, voice rising. Pack it up. We move. Now. The squad jolted awake, weapons slung, gear grabbed in practiced chaos. Maya snapped the minigun sling over her shoulder, the weapon gleaming faintly in the gray light. Her calm didn't break even when the woman clutched her child tighter and began to cry. Reyes squatted before the civilians. You stay quiet. You follow us. You slow us down, we leave you. Understand? The man nodded desperately, words spilling in broken English. Yes, yes. We quiet. We follow. Dan watched Maya watching Reyes. Her face didn't move, but her knuckles whitened slightly where they gripped the minigun's handle. They filed out into the canyon, boots crunching on loose rock. The cold air carried every sound, every breath, as if announcing them to the world. The ridge above was empty now, but the absence didn't feel like safety. It felt like the calm before something ugly. Vickers jogged ahead to scout the path. Reyes held the civilians in the center of the formation. Dan took the rear, scanning the cliffs behind them. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. They had gone less than a mile when the first shot cracked. The round slammed into the dirt at McBride's feet, spraying gravel. Instinct dropped the squad flat. The canyon erupted in gunfire, echoes bouncing off the walls until it felt like 100 rifles were firing at once. Contact left. Vickers shouted, returning fire. Muzzle flashes sparked from the ridge. Taliban fighters were dug in, rifles barking, rounds ricocheting off stone. Dust filled the air, stinging eyes and throat. Suppress. Suppress. Reyes roared. The squad answered, rifles thundering. Maya dropped to one knee, the minigun spooling up with a metallic whine. The roar that followed shook the canyon like thunder, streams of tracers tearing into the ridge. Stone exploded, bodies dropped. Dan scrambled to cover beside McBride, firing controlled bursts. His throat burned, heart hammering. The woman screamed as she shielded the child, the man dragging them down behind a boulder. Mortars, someone shouted. Dan's stomach turned cold. A hollow thump echoed from the ridge, followed by the rising whine of incoming fire. Down. The round hit 20 meters behind them, a geyser of dirt and fire. The blast threw Dan forward, ears ringing, lungs gasping for air. His helmet slammed against stone. When his vision cleared, he saw Maya. She hadn't flinched. She pivoted the minigun, chewing a new line of fire across the ridge. Shift left. Push, she barked, voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The squad obeyed without hesitation. Reyes didn't argue. They shifted, bounding forward from cover to cover, pushing for a side path that cut toward the higher rocks. Dan hauled McBride to his feet. Move, damn it. Another mortar round screamed in, slamming into the canyon wall. Shrapnel hissed through the air. Dan felt a hot sting across his cheek, but he kept moving, dragging McBride along. The civilians stumbled after them, the man half carrying the boy now, the woman pale with terror. Bullets snapped overhead. Dust filled every breath. Frag out. Vickers hurled a grenade up at the ridge. The explosion rocked the slope, silencing 2 rifles, but more answered immediately. Too many. McBride gasped. Then we kill more. Dan growled, firing until his rifle clicked dry. He slammed in a fresh mag with trembling hands, throat raw from smoke. Maya swept the ridge again, the minigun howling. Fighters dropped like cut grass, but still they came, shadows moving through smoke and dust, relentless. Reyes pointed at a narrow gap in the rocks ahead. There. Funnel point. We make our stand there. The squad sprinted, dragging the civilians through the chaos. Dan's legs burned, lungs screaming, but he pushed harder, every instinct screaming that stopping meant death. They slid into the gap, stone walls closing around them. Reyes dropped to one knee, rifle steady. Hold this choke. They can't mass here. We bleed them out. The squad formed a firing line. Muzzle flashes lit the narrow pass. The canyon ahead boiled with Taliban fighters charging, rifles raised, war cries echoing. Dan fired until his shoulder ached. McBride cursed, firing 2 rifles at once after his own overheated. Vickers laughed like a madman, emptying grenade after grenade into the choke. And Maya. Maya was fire and steel, the minigun roaring until the barrel smoked, eyes cold, movements precise. She cut men down in rows, never blinking, never hesitating. The first wave broke against them, bodies crumpling in the narrow passage. Smoke and dust choked the air. Still more came. Ammo's low. McBride shouted. Make every round count. Reyes barked back. Dan dropped 2 fighters with a single burst, teeth gritted. Sweat stung his eyes. His magazine was half empty. Maybe less. The civilians huddled against the wall, the boy crying silently now, eyes huge. The woman clutched him close, whispering prayers. The man stared at the soldiers with a look that was half hope, half despair. Another mortar screamed overhead, slamming into the rocks above the gap. Stone rained down, blocking part of the pass but not enough. Fighters surged through the smoke. Dan's rifle clicked empty. He drew his sidearm, firing until it too was dry. A fighter lunged at him, blade flashing. Dan barely had time to raise his arm. The minigun roared. The fighter vanished in a mist of blood and dust. Dan turned. Maya stood over him, smoke curling from the weapon, eyes flat and unreadable. For a second, something passed between them, something sharp, dangerous, unspoken. Then Reyes shouted. Fall back. Secondary position. They scrambled deeper into the gap, pulling the civilians with them. Dan's chest heaved, his ears rang, but adrenaline drove his legs forward. As they retreated, Dan looked back once more at the canyon. The Taliban were regrouping, gathering for another push. Their numbers were endless, their will unbroken. The squad had survived the first storm. But the second was already on its way. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the ringing and the exhaustion, Dan knew the real fight wasn't just against the men on the ridge. It was with the truth sitting in their ranks. The SEAL tattoo. The woman with the minigun. And the question no one had dared to ask yet. Who the hell was Maya? The squad stumbled deeper into the labyrinth of rock, lungs heaving, ears still ringing from the last mortar strike. The canyon walls narrowed into a twisting gash through the mountains, forcing them into single file. Dust clung to sweat-soaked skin, and the copper tang of blood mixed with the bitter stench of gunpowder. Reyes halted them at a split in the rock, his chest rising and falling as though even his iron lungs were taxed. He raised a hand for silence, eyes scanning both routes. One was narrow, jagged, and steep. The other curved downward, vanishing into darkness where the canyon swallowed itself. Dan pressed his back to the wall, trying to catch breath that wouldn't come. McBride slumped beside him, muttering curses under his breath. The civilians clung together in a silent huddle, the child's wide eyes reflecting faint light. Vickers leaned close to Reyes. Which way? Neither looks good, Reyes murmured. High path makes us targets. Low path we get funneled like cattle. Dan swallowed, voice hoarse. They'll be on us in minutes. We can't stay here. Maya moved past him, silent as always, eyes fixed on the downward path. She crouched, running her hand over the dust. Then she rose and said, voice flat but certain. This way. Cover. Narrow enough to choke them if they follow. Reyes shot her a sharp look, but he didn't argue. Instead he gave the order, move. Quiet. Go. They descended into the shadows, boots slipping on loose stone. The walls closed in tighter, the air cooler, carrying a faint dampness that whispered of an underground stream. For a few blessed minutes, there was only the sound of their breathing and the scrape of gear. But Dan's nerves didn't ease. He kept glancing back, expecting muzzle flashes to erupt from the ridges above. Finally, the passage opened into a shallow cavern. A thin trickle of water ran down one wall, pooling in a depression before seeping into the earth. Water, McBride whispered, falling to his knees. He cupped his hands and drank greedily, splashing some over his face. The civilians followed, desperate. Reyes checked his watch, then his radio. Static answered. He swore under his breath. We're in a blind spot. No comms here. Vickers sat heavily on a rock, reloading magazines with trembling hands. We burned through half our ammo already. Half. McBride barked a bitter laugh. I'm down to 2 mags and a prayer. Dan checked his own kit. 3 mags left, half a box of pistol rounds, 2 frags. Not enough. Never enough. The silence stretched, broken only by the trickle of water and the distant echo of something moving in the canyon. A reminder that the Taliban were still out there. Hunting. Dan's gaze drifted to Maya. She sat apart, the minigun laid across her lap, hands working over it with mechanical calm. But Dan had seen it, when the fighter had lunged at him, when she'd saved him with a burst that left nothing but red mist. Her eyes hadn't wavered. She'd pulled the trigger like she was swatting a fly. And that tattoo. It gnawed at him. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You were never just army, were you? Her hands didn't pause on the weapon. Her eyes flicked to his, cool and unreadable. What makes you say that? The trident on your arm. His tone was harder now, though he kept it quiet. That seal ink. Not exactly something you get at a corner shop. For the first time since he'd met her, something shifted in her face. Not fear. Not guilt. Just the faintest flicker of irritation, quickly buried. "Does it matter?" she asked. "It matters if I'm trusting you to cover my six," Dan shot back. She leaned closer, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "You think I haven't earned that trust? You're breathing because I pulled the trigger. Twice today." Dan opened his mouth, but Reyes's voice sliced through the tension. "Enough. Both of you." They turned. Reyes stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You think I didn't notice? I know what that ink means. I know she's not who she says she is. But right now she's the one with the firepower keeping us alive. So you'll shelve the questions and keep moving." Dan's jaw tightened. He wanted to push, but Reyes's stare left no room. He looked back at Maya. She gave him nothing. No explanation, no denial. Just silence. Before the moment could stretch further, the boy sneezed. A tiny, fragile sound, but in the canyon, it echoed like a flare. Reyes's head snapped up. He raised a hand for silence. The squad froze. And then they heard it. Boots on stone. Voices in the distance. The Taliban were closing in. "Positions," Reyes whispered. They spread out, rifles leveled at the dark mouth of the passage. Dan's pulse pounded in his ears. He could feel the civilians shaking behind him. The first shadows appeared. 3 men, rifles raised, moving cautiously. Dan exhaled, steadying his aim. "Wait," Reyes hissed. The fighters crept closer, scanning the cavern. One raised his weapon toward the civilians. Reyes gave the order. "Fire." The cavern erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the walls. The first 3 men dropped before they could scream. But the echoes carried, bouncing down the canyon like an alarm. "Fall back." Reyes barked. They retreated deeper into the cavern, the passage twisting again. The gunfire grew louder behind them. Dozens of boots now, shouts in Pashto, the hunt in full cry. Dan fired over his shoulder, rounds sparking against stone, dropping one fighter who got too close. Sweat stung his eyes, lungs burning. The passage bent sharply, then widened into a high-walled basin open to the sky. Dawn light spilled in, painting the rocks red gold. Reyes didn't hesitate. "Set defense. This is where we hold." They formed a half-circle at the mouth of the basin, rifles up. The civilians huddled behind them. The first Taliban fighters surged in, rifles blazing. Dan dropped 2 with controlled bursts, ducking as rounds snapped overhead. Vickers hurled a grenade, the explosion rocking the basin and shredding the first wave. But more poured in. Dozens now. Maybe more. Maya unleashed the minigun. The roar filled the basin, brass casings spilling like rain. Fighters crumpled under the hail, bodies tumbling into the dust. But even the thunder of the weapon couldn't stem the tide. "Ammo's low." McBride shouted, emptying his last mag. "Hold." Reyes barked. Dan reloaded, firing until his rifle smoked. His shoulder ached, ears rang, but he kept pulling the trigger. Every fighter he dropped bought one more breath, one more second. The Taliban pressed harder, rounds chewing into the rocks around them. One grenade landed close, too close. Dan threw himself over the civilians, felt the blast slam into his back, shrapnel biting. He grunted, forcing himself up, vision swimming. "You good?" McBride shouted, dragging him to cover. "Still here," Dan gasped, raising his rifle again. The minigun fell silent. Dan turned. Maya was swapping belts, hands moving fast. But her eyes flicked to Reyes. For the first time he saw strain in her face. "Running dry," she said flatly. Reyes's jaw clenched. He scanned the basin, mind racing. Then his eyes settled on the civilians. The man clutched the boy, eyes wild. Reyes knelt, grabbing the man by the collar. "There another way out? Another path?" The man nodded frantically, pointing to the far wall. Yes. Small path. Go trail. Very steep." Reyes snapped back to his squad. "Vickers, McBride, cover fire. Dan, Maya, move the civilians. I'll take rear." Dan's gut twisted. "Sir." "Do it." Reyes barked. There was no time to argue. Dan grabbed the woman's arm, pulling her toward the far wall where a narrow ledge wound upward. Maya shouldered the minigun and scooped the boy up with her free arm like he weighed nothing. The child clung to her silently, wide eyes locked on her face. McBride and Vickers laid down, suppressing fire, rifles cracking until they clicked dry. Then they switched to sidearms, shouting curses into the chaos. Dan scrambled up the ledge, dragging the woman with him. The path was barely wide enough for one person, the drop sheer. Bullets sparked off the rock inches away. "Move." Maya barked behind him, the boy pressed against her chest, the minigun roaring one-handed down the slope. The weapon thundered, fighters dropping in heaps, but the belt was almost gone. Dan could hear it, the whine-changing pitch, the stutter that meant the end. Reyes stayed below, rifle steady, firing with cold precision. All of you. I'll follow. Dan hauled the woman up onto a wider ledge, chest heaving. He turned back just in time to see Maya's belt run dry. The weapon clicked empty. She hurled it at an oncoming fighter, the impact knocking him off the ledge. Then she drew a pistol, firing point blank, still climbing with the boy in her other arm. Dan reached down, grabbing her wrist, pulling her up the last stretch. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, hers blazing with something fierce, something he hadn't seen before. Then Reyes's voice echoed below. Go. Now. Dan looked down. Reyes was still firing, but the tide was too heavy. Fighters swarmed the basin, rushing toward him. Sir. Dan shouted. Go. Reyes roared. The last image burned into Dan's eyes as he turned and pulled Maya and the civilians higher. Reyes standing alone in the basin, rifle blazing, the morning sun painting him in fire. And then the path curved, the rocks closed, and he was gone. The storm outside the hangar door howled like a living beast. Rain lashed sideways, rattling on metal siding and pooling against the concrete. The battered C-130 sat on the strip, its tailgate already lowered, engines whining with a readiness that promised both salvation and risk. Inside the hangar, however, no one was looking at the plane. All eyes were on the dead man on the floor, Colonel Armitage. His body lay sprawled, blood pooling beneath him, eyes frozen wide open in a permanent stare. Cooper's chest heaved as he dropped his smoking sidearm. His ears rang, though whether from the gunshot or his own pounding heart, he couldn't tell. He was going to sell us out, Cooper said, voice gravelly. Transmit the coordinates to the enemy. I saw the encrypted SATCOM he pulled from his pocket. Harris looked down at the colonel's corpse. The seal tattoo on Armitage's arm gleamed faintly in the flickering emergency lights. For a moment no one spoke. Rain drummed louder, like judgment from the heavens. Doesn't matter, Ramirez said finally, pushing her wet hair back. He's gone. And if Cooper's right, we just dodged a betrayal that would have gutted the mission. Now we've got one priority: get out before reinforcements hit this strip. The decision split the group. Some soldiers glanced at Cooper with suspicion, others with grim trust. Carter shifted his rifle, jaw tight. We leave him here? Ramirez nodded. No time for ceremony. The mission lives, or all of this, she gestured at the colonel's body, was wasted. They moved. Weapons checked, ammo redistributed, wounded stabilized with field dressings. The team shuffled out into the storm, hunched against the wind. The C-130's engines roared, propellers slicing rain into a misty spray. A crew chief waved frantically from the tailgate. Inside, the plane was dim and deafening. They strapped in where they could, cramming between crates and gear. The pilot's voice boomed over the intercom. Hold on, boys and girls. This strip's half mud, half suicide. If you've got a god, pray to him now. The C-130 lurched forward, wheels fighting the waterlogged runway. Rain streaked across the fuselage, and for a long breathless second, it seemed they would bog down and stall. Then lift. The aircraft clawed into the storm clouds, engines screaming, belly buffeted by turbulence. Soldiers gripped straps in each other's arms, eyes squeezed shut, teeth clenched. Minutes stretched like hours. Then through the noise, Ramirez's voice cut. Listen up. What happened back there stays between us. We focus forward. We regroup, resupply, and finish this mission. No hesitation. The men and women nodded, though unease lingered like smoke. Hours later, the plane touched down at a forward operating base carved into a jungle valley. The storm had thinned to drizzle. The soldiers filed out, stiff and exhausted, greeted by MPs and medical corpsmen. They were ushered into a briefing tent, dripping water and adrenaline. At the center stood a general with hard eyes, waiting. Behind him, a screen displayed a satellite feed. Enemy convoys moving toward a cluster of villages, heavy armor leading the way. The general didn't mince words. You stopped a disaster tonight, but the war doesn't pause for your grief. Those convoys will cut through civilians by dawn. We've got one shot to intercept. That's you. The map zoomed. Roads twisted through jungle, choke points glowing in red. You hit them here. Ambush, destroy armor, disrupt advance. You succeed, villages live. You fail, we count body bags by the hundreds. Understood. Understood, the squad muttered, weary but steady. Outside, the drizzle thickened again, washing mud into rivulets. Cooper leaned against a tent pole, scrubbing his face with calloused hands. Ramirez stepped beside him, eyes scanning the rain. You did what had to be done. Don't carry it alone. Cooper shook his head. He was one of us. He made his choice, she said quietly. Now we make ours. They spent the night prepping, checking explosives, plotting firing arcs, calibrating drones. Banter flickered through the fatigue, humor a shield against the weight pressing in. Carter grumbled about missing his kid's birthday, and Alvarez cracked a joke about sending balloons with grenades tied to them. Even Ramirez laughed briefly. Before dawn they moved out. A convoy of Humvees slogged through mud tracks, headlights muted. The jungle pressed close, wet leaves brushing shoulders. Mosquitoes whined, and every shadow seemed alive. At the choke point, a narrow road between two ridges, they set the trap. Claymores wired, IEDs buried, sniper nests dug into mud. The air was heavy with tension, like the jungle itself held its breath. Hours passed. Then came the low rumble, enemy engines heavy and relentless. Shadows of armored trucks appeared through mist. Voices barked in a foreign tongue. Boots splashed. Ramirez whispered over comms, "Wait, wait." The lead vehicle rolled over the buried IED. A thunderous blast ripped the road, flipping steel into the air. Gunfire erupted instantly. Cooper squeezed his trigger, cutting down infantry in the chaos. Snipers on the ridge picked targets clean. Explosions lit the jungle like lightning, smoke curling thick and acrid. The ambush was savage. Armor tried to push through, only to be met with at-4 rockets that turned engines into fireballs. Soldiers screamed, some running blind into the jungle, others fighting with desperate fury. But the cost came fast. Carter was hit in the shoulder, spinning down into the mud. Alvarez caught shrapnel in the thigh, blood soaking his pants. Cooper and Ramirez dragged them behind cover, laying down suppressive fire with one hand while patching wounds with the other. The enemy regrouped. Mortar rounds began falling, chewing the ridges, sending dirt and rock raining down. The squad huddled in the mud, ears ringing, bodies bruised. "Push!" Ramirez shouted. "We finish this now." They surged forward. Grenades arced, rifles barked. The jungle roared with violence. Cooper tackled an enemy soldier in close combat, the two rolling in the muck, knives flashing. He ended it with a brutal strike, chest heaving. At last, silence crept back. The road was littered with burning hulks and twisted bodies. Smoke hung like a shroud, acrid and choking. The squad limped together, bleeding, filthy but alive. Ramirez keyed her comm. Objective complete. Convoy neutralized. Civilians safe for now. Static crackled, then command's voice. "Copy. Extraction inbound. You bought us time. Hold position." They collapsed against wreckage, weapons still in hand. Rain began again, gentle this time, washing blood from armor and skin. Carter broke the silence. "Think they'll remember this back home? Or just call it another line on a report?" No one answered. They all knew. When the extraction birds thundered in, lifting them away from the smoking jungle, Cooper looked back one last time. The ridges faded into mist, but the memory would never fade. Back at base, medals would be handed out, speeches made. But in the quiet hours they would remember the colonel's corpse on the hangar floor, the faces of the men they killed, the friends they almost lost. And Ramirez, staring out at the storm through the barracks window, whispered to herself words no one else heard. "This war isn't over. Not for us. Not yet." The rain answered, steady and endless, as if promising more battles to come. The end.